Welcome to the Owner Mindset. I'm Anthony Luna, your host and the CEO of Cosign Equity. This podcast is all about diving deep into the world of finance, real estate, property management, entrepreneurship, and my journeys as CEO.
Today we're joined by a very special guest, Erica Tromley, our Director of Operations here at Cosign Equity. With over 5 years at our firm and over a decade in the industry, Erica has been instrumental in the success of numerous properties across California. Erica, can you start by telling our listeners of the Owner Mindset podcast a bit about yourself and your role here at Cosign Equity?
Sure. I have 12 years of experience in the property management industry. And as the Director of Operations, I am really managing my team to do the best that they can with managing properties, budgets, tenant management, vendor management, speaking with clients, among other things with handling the properties and portfolios.
So when you mentioned your job is to supervise and manage other team members here at Cosign Equity. Tell our listeners and viewers a little bit about who those people are. What's the title and role of people that report to you as Director of Operations?
I have a few senior property managers. I have 3 of them. I also have a leasing coordinator that reports to me. The biggest way that I support my team is really ensuring that they have the guidance and leadership that they need and support that they need in order to get their day-to-day jobs completed.
What's the hardest part about your job as a Director of Operations managing a team of senior property managers?
I think that there's a few different things that are difficult about my position, but I think one of the main difficult things that we do come across is when we're unable to fulfill a request of a tenant. And most of the time that means financially. And if we're not able to assist them in a way that would also be beneficial for the property or the owner, then giving them that answer is probably one of the hardest things to do.
We always talk about the key is trying to find a win-win for both the client and the tenant, and really making sure that it's going to work for both parties. What's an example of a situation where there isn't an opportunity for a win-win, or the things that they're asking for aren't doable or maybe unrealistic? What's a recent memory you have?
We all experienced COVID. We all understand what that did in the economy, and it touched every single family in one way or another, whether that's a business or their home. And the hardest part about that was whenever we would get a request to waive fees or waive rents, and yet our owners do also have their own bills for the properties. Those are very difficult conversations to have when you really want to help somebody and you're unable to.
So, Erica, would you mind explaining what is multifamily property management? What does that even mean?
Multifamily property management is exactly how it sounds, managing a property that has multifamilies, multi-units. That could be either a duplex or that could be 400 units. So it's a variety. It's anything other than a single family home.
What's the best part of managing a 400-unit apartment building? And what's your least favorite or the worst part about it?
You're not going to like this answer, but being an on-site manager for 400 units was my all-time favorite job.
I don't dislike that answer. Yeah, we both started our careers as on-site managers, and I would have to agree that was probably the easiest part of the industry and business to see that tangible effect that you have on the tenant's life, because you're their neighbor.
Yes.
So it's you're living that experience with them. No, I don't disagree with you. There are moments that I really miss being an on-site manager, and
yeah.
I've joked with Lauren. I don't think she's going to go for it, but I would love to, the next property we buy, it be big enough that it needs an on-site, and I would not be opposed to being on-site again.
Bright, shiny object. I agree with Lauren. I agree with Lauren. But to answer your question, the best part about it was the relationships.
Yeah.
Because you really felt like you could make a difference with every person that came in, even if you couldn't, just by connecting with them.
Yeah.
You made a difference in their day. And even if you couldn't help them with something that was going on in their unit, you could, like I said, just connect with them, have a conversation, and then the next thing you know, they're walking out in a better mood. And worst thing, though, was also you can't get away from it.
Home is your office.
Yes, your home is your office. And if you want a 3-day weekend or you want a holiday weekend or a holiday week, you're taking a real vacation.
Yep.
There's really no getting away from all of those relationships you created.
My first client ever owned the building he lived in, and he had lived in every property that he purchased. And he doesn't do it today, but even when he stopped being a client for us and I merged into Cosign and joined George at Cosign, he was still living at a property that he owned as a tenant in the building.
I could understand it. I really could.
I think for him, and I think for the owners that choose to do that, of like being a part of the process and being a part of the community, I think that type of on-site manager or client or property owner, there's that sense of community that they enjoy building.
Right.
I think that's probably one of the things that I tried to bring with me to Cosign, and we've tried to really nurture, is like building that sense of community and engaging the tenants, whether they're residential or commercial.
Right.
But you mentioned not being able to turn off. In some respects, property management is that way no matter what product type you're in. I guess the difference is you're not living there if you're managing office buildings. Any other similarities you see from your previous life as an on-site manager and what you do today as a director of operations?
You don't turn off. That's the biggest thing. We can talk about a vacation and I will still check my phone. If you genuinely care, you can't just turn off because you want things to get resolved and you can trust your team. As much as I trust my team to get things done, and you know that they'll get things done, but do they ever need help in order to make sure that a tenant or a client or a vendor even is getting the help that they need in order to go to the next step? So I think that's a huge similarity no matter what type of property you're managing.
So we've talked a lot about some of the day-to-day parts of your role, of supporting the team and dealing with maintenance emergencies and being on call. What are some of the things that happen maybe much more infrequently on an annual basis or quarterly basis that you have to think about as a director of operations?
One of the biggest things for our multifamily properties would be our biannual interior inspections. They're not something that our tenants get very excited about, but they're definitely something that help us maintain the safety and structure of the building. One main thing that really gets overlooked, smoke detectors. A tenant might never think that there's going to be a fire or some type of smoke emergency or carbon monoxide issue in their unit. And so that's the number one reason. The second that we see that, we want to go ahead and replace those, or some people even just pull the batteries out and they don't think of what might happen.
I can tell you I have a neighbor. I don't know who the neighbor is yet. I got to figure out where it's coming from because I can hear the beep every 60 seconds and I don't think they hear it anymore. How many times have you gotten into a unit and the tenants kind of tuned out that alarm that's going off every 60 seconds?
Actually, I'll do you one better. They just pull it off of the wall, and so it's not beeping anymore. So it probably happens in a good 30% of the units.
Okay. That seems pretty small. It's just a smoke detector on the wall. What's the issue?
Well, most smoke detectors are also equipped with the carbon monoxide detection as well. A lot of people don't know what the carbon monoxide detector is there for. Carbon monoxide leak, or however you want to call it, is actually also called the silent killer. So if that carbon monoxide detector goes off, it means that there is a leak in your home somewhere and you could potentially die from it and not even know that there was an issue. I only know that because I experienced it in a hotel in Big Bear.
Wait, what? Tell me about that.
So we went for Christmas a couple years ago, and our carbon monoxide detector went off because there's a fireplace in the hotel room, and we had used it. And so it starts going off at maybe 1 or 2 o'clock in the morning, but we had stopped using it around 8. And we go up to the front desk, and he says, just pull it off the wall. And I said, hold on, I'm pretty sure that they're there for a reason. So I Googled it because I've never actually had to come across it before. Mm-hmm. What is it for? It's called the silent killer. Yeah. Because if you are breathing that in all night, you just won't wake up.
When there's a really bad winter in different parts of the country where it snows, you'll hear of people that brought a generator indoors or brought a barbecue indoors, and that CO2 comes off of those type of fixtures, and they fall asleep and never wake up, unfortunately.
Another thing is discoloration. a lot of people think that discoloration, mildew is something that doesn't need to be reported. And it can easily be a larger issue, and it is much better for us to find something like a water leak ahead of time in order to resolve that issue.
I think that's a funny way to describe it for most listeners. I think for those people that are in the real estate industry or property management industry, probably not unfamiliar with the term discoloration. Why are you calling it discoloration instead of calling it mildew or mold or whatever other description it could be?
I will stay away from the word mold as much as possible because I'm not a mold expert.
When you go into a unit, can't you just tell that it's mold or no?
No, you have to get it tested by a mold professional. And I'm not a mold professional. And so unless somebody comes in that's licensed and insured and they test that to make sure that it is mold, it's just discoloration to me.
So are you telling listeners of the podcast just ignore it if it's discoloration?
Absolutely not. Report it to your property manager so that way they can get it tested for you to make sure that you're safe.
What's maybe the worst leak you've ever had to deal with, whether it was residential or commercial real estate?
This is actually recent. We had a tenant that, and this is exactly why interior inspections are always something that you want to do for residential properties, whether it's single family, multifamily, whichever. We had a crack in a sink, and it wasn't something that was very noticeable, but over time it got bigger and bigger, and the tenant didn't report that it actually was growing. But our team was also investigating it. We found it and noticed that, hey, this is a bigger crack than it was the last time. Maybe we should look into this. Found out that it had been leaking underneath a vanity and caused mold underneath the vanity, and the whole vanity and flooring need to be replaced.
What made the team not jump on it as soon as they saw that there was a crack to begin with?
It's all about seeing if it's superficial or if it's something that is actually a real crack or if it's part of the design of the sink. But again, the whole purpose of that preventative or those interior inspections is to monitor and see if things change over time.
So in all these years working in real estate, what's the biggest challenge you've ever encountered in a multifamily property?
The biggest challenge, we're going to go back to mold again. The biggest challenge that I ever encountered in a multifamily property was actually a tenant that was reporting that he was experiencing mold throughout his unit.
Okay.
And unfortunately, the owner that we were working with at the time did not want to pursue getting the unit tested. It progressed for months. And I'm talking to the point where he had hats hanging up in the closet and they were getting mold on the hats. We looked at his couch, and his couch had mold growing on the side of it. It was really bad. And eventually I pushed to get the tenant relocated to a different unit so that way we could fully test the unit that he was in. And we found out that there was an entire landscape leak, foundation leak on the entire side of the building. And even his neighbor was experiencing a mold leak or a leak that was causing mold. And behind all of her dishes, she actually had mold growing. So it affected the entire side of the bottom part of the units and in between as well.
If we knew that there was some kind of issue, why weren't we able to act? Why did we have to wait?
This wasn't here. I do want to say that. I do want to say, so this was a previous position. And so it was a very different way of doing things. And it was also before I knew how serious something like that could be. And we also didn't handle vendor relations directly. We only handled direct maintenance items. So if we needed an outside vendor, it was not done directly by the on-site.
So this was done this was like a big corporate property. You had to run it up the ladder if you wanted to get this done.
Yes.
So let's take a pivot and move away from the challenging, stressful parts of the business and talk about some of the best practices. One side, you have happy tenants, the lifeblood of any successful property. And now on the other hand, you have a healthy financial performance, the fuel that keeps everything running. Effective property management is all about keeping everything perfectly balanced and really finding those win-wins. So can you share some best practices for keeping tenants happy while still maintaining a high level of financial performance at a property?
I definitely think that you explaining balance is a very key factor. Preventative maintenance is probably the number one way to do that. And while it might not look very favorable on a month-to-month basis with doing preventative maintenance, it really helps in the long run, and the tenants do see that. For example, HVAC units, that's one that actually came up today, and quarterly that might look like a $2,000 bill, but if it goes out because you weren't maintaining it, that could look like a $10,000 bill. So it's all about things that can really keep up the life of your property, and that'll make your tenants happier in the long run.
I think even more so, we're kind of going back to that conversation we had with the client that we met with today. Again, if this client had been doing the preventative maintenance of $2,000 a year, the risk of the big $10,000 expense would have been less likely to happen. But also, it's not just $10,000 that's at risk. How many HVAC units are on that roof of that one property that costs $2,000 a year to inspect?
I would estimate probably a dozen.
So
at
we're talking $120,000 that we're risking. Not, all 12, all those units are not going to fail at once, but we have no sense of the state of those without that preventative maintenance. And we're risking that if there's a small issue, just like the discoloration, without the preventative maintenance, you're risking a small issue destroying a unit.
And then you're risking habitability.
100%.
I think another thing that owners really don't think about, pest control. Pest control is huge. I mean, you can bring in, let's talk about roaches. Everybody sees them at some point. You can bring them in very, very easily from produce at your local grocery store. If you don't have preventative measures to ensure that your property maintains cleanliness, you're going to have upset tenants.
Pest control monthly service is not an expensive thing. It's what does that cost generally per property that we manage? If it's a large apartment building, $100 a month, a couple $100 a month, about $200 a month for a large apartment building. I would say
2 to 3. If I remember correctly, our 400 unit was about $250 a month, and that usually included a weekly visit to the property and 7 services each visit. So that's a lot of service. Mm-hmm. And on top of that, if there's not a unit to get serviced, then they're also spraying the grounds for ants or looking at bait stations for mice. So there's many different pieces to it for such a low cost.
So have you ever had a property that you can recall that we took over that maybe didn't have a preventative maintenance plan?
I do have one, but it's not multifamily.
Go for it.
It is a commercial building, very small, just 3 units. And when the entire property became vacant, we actually ended up having mice issues. But once we got the pest control on top of it and we started doing regular services, it went away pretty quickly.
When we first started this conversation, we were talking about how much I loved being an on-site manager. This is probably the reason that my wife, Lauren, would not let us go back to being an on-site manager. Have I ever told you the mice story from my first building? Lauren was doing rounds throughout the unit, and she was smelling like a really odd smell that she couldn't put her finger on. She's like, I don't know what this smell is. I was like, well, if you can't figure out what it is, like let's do some plugins and to get rid of the smell for now, but we need to go find the source of it. I think like the next day or a couple days later, we're just looking for this smell. And she had put a plug in, but the smell was only getting worse. She identified which unit the smell was coming from. Then we started to think about it, and we never really saw this tenant very much. We looked at the cameras. This property had a camera system, and we noticed that this tenant was getting lots of deliveries to the property. Basically, everything they needed, they got delivered. Groceries, fast food, Amazon boxes. And then I started remembering, that tenant has a lot of Amazon boxes all the time downstairs. But then as we're reviewing the cameras, we never saw the tenant take those boxes out of their unit, or the food containers, or the groceries out of their unit. So then we started doing interior inspections of the neighboring areas, and we walked in, and there were mice everywhere in the unit. And then we asked the tenant, why didn't you report this? He's like, they showed up one day, and I didn't know what to do, so I just let it be. And I think sometimes, again, why we do interior inspections at Coast and Equity is sometimes circumstances in somebody's life, the stress, the challenges they're dealing with, that may not be a big issue to them, but it can be a huge issue to the property. And it ultimately is a huge issue to their health. You don't want to be in a unit with mice in it for health reasons. So it was difficult to navigate. We helped the tenant get everything out of there and get it cleaned up, and it took a while. It took a lot of help to do it.
I did not have big mice or rat experiences. I had roach experiences, a lot of roach experiences.
Which makes sense, again, in that part of Southern California with that much heat, that I think that's a common issue where the hotter it is in that part of the state as well.
I think it's important for tenants to know that reporting things doesn't mean you're automatically paying for it or you're automatically in trouble or
that it's your fault.
Or that it's your fault. It can be fixed, and that's what a property management is there for.
So is it true that multifamily properties are harder to manage than single-family properties?
In my opinion, no. I really do believe that single-family homes are much harder to manage than multifamily. Usually that's due to a cash flow issue, and multifamily has a much larger cash flow issue than single-family.
I just realized you're giving away our competitive edge. There's so many other property managers that love doing single families, and we're telling them the truth that multifamily is easier. Most property management companies across the country are single-family home, duplex, triplex managers, but we prefer not to do that product type. Why?
I think it's a generational thing. Some properties, if they're paid off and there is no mortgage, a lot of the times they're kept up better. You have the ability to ask the owner to contribute funds or utilize a month's worth of rent to help keep up a property.
Are you saying millennial property owners and property investors are terrible? Is that what you're saying?
No, I'm just saying that maybe, inflation is there.
That's fair.
You pay a lot more for a house now, and which means not only for the house in the full term of the loan, but on a monthly basis, most of the time you are barely breaking even.
Strategic planning plays a significant role in what we do as property managers. How do we approach strategic planning here at Cosign Equity?
Budgeting is something that we're monitoring very closely on a regular basis, and not only for multifamily or for commercial, but any property in general. What are the ways that we can always do the best, get the best service for the property, but save money at the same time? So yes, you want preventative maintenance. Yes, you always are going to have your monthly expenses, but do you have the best vendor? Are you overpaying for a service? Are you getting the services that you're actually paying for? So it's about always constantly looking at those things. That's why not only interior inspections are very vital for a property, but exterior and just property inspections in general. For multifamily as well, you also always want to keep on top of your rental increases, annual rental increases. The holidays are coming up. I really want our families to know ahead of time before the holidays hit that they're going to have a little bit of a higher rent come December or January, depending on when their increase is supposed to hit. So I think that is also a different type of strategic planning, because if we do end up getting a tenant that wants to vacate, we can hopefully fill that unit well before they're actually out of the unit, especially during the holidays.
And I think you hit on something as well with, talking about tenant retention and tenant satisfaction. That's part of the strategy, so if they do have a renewal period in the holidays, you're being strategic about making sure that you're giving them advance notice so that they can determine is this the right decision for themselves.
Exactly.
I imagine that many of those tenants appreciate that you're doing that. And again, that's about tenant satisfaction and retention long term. And for those that do appreciate that, will likely stay long term because of that relationship. By mastering the art of balancing tenant satisfaction with financial goals, implementing strategic planning, and adapting your approach to specialized properties, you can elevate your multifamily property management game. Remember, a successful property manager is a data-driven decision maker, a proactive communicator, and a continuous learner who adapts to the constantly changing world of real estate. Thank you, Erica, for joining us today. Your insights have been incredibly valuable to me and to our listeners. Thanks for joining and listening today. I hope this episode gave you some valuable insights into multifamily property management. If you want to learn more, check out Cosign Equity's website or reach out to me directly on my social media at Anthony_A_Luna. Don't forget to subscribe for more great content.